If someone asked you to point out the United States on a world map, this would be easy. You would look for North America and point to the territory in between Canada and Mexico that stretches from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. But what if someone asked you to point out the sphere of influence of the United States? In other words, could you locate the regions in the world that are currently under some form of U.S. control? This would be much harder. After all, the U.S. Army currently has almost 200,000 troops deployed throughout the world. Some of our engagements are championed by our government, but others are downplayed or less obvious. The United States is not alone in its broad reach. Throughout history, many powerful empires have stretched their influence to include many countries that do not technically belong to them. When nations create policies to extend their power throughout the world in order to achieve some sort of benefit, this is called imperialism. Imperialism has taken many different forms throughout history. After the Industrial Revolution, European powers like Great Britain, France, and Germany needed raw materials to create new products. This led them to compete with each other for territory in other continents, ignoring the needs of the native people who already lived there. This era was called the Age of Imperialism, and its impacts still reverberate throughout many African and Asian nations. Imperialism was often motivated by economic goals, but imperialist powers offered many justifications for their interference with weaker nations. For instance, leaders of developed nations often argue that it is their duty to spread democracy and civilized principles throughout the rest of the modern world. Regardless of the motivating factors, imperialism has complex consequences. At times, foreign interventions can rebuild struggling nations. In many instances, imperialism leads to a destructive level of dependence on foreign support. As you will see in various case studies, it can take generations for countries to disentangle themselves from imperialist influence. Ultimately, it is perhaps most important to recognize that imperialism is not an idea of the past. The desire to control other countries' resources, territory, and decision-making abilities continues to shape international politics. In fact, many argue that the United States' current foreign policy decisions are imperialist in nature. In order to think critically about this question and about any decisions made by modern governments, it is important to ask ourselves, what does imperialism look like? What are its impacts? When, if ever, is it useful or justified? Once we build this understanding, we can evaluate the decisions our leaders are making at this very moment.